Once upon a time in the countryside of France, there was a grand chateau that stood tall and proud. It was owned by the wealthy and powerful Dupont family, who had lived in the chateau for generations. However, there was a dark history behind the grandeur of the chateau, and the villagers who lived nearby whispered about a curse that had befallen the Dupont family. Legend has it that the curse was placed on the family by a vengeful witch who had been wronged by them. The witch had cursed the family, saying that they would suffer the same fate as she did. From that day on, strange things began to happen in the chateau. The family members started disappearing, one by one, without any explanation. The villagers whispered that the witch's curse was coming true. Years passed, and the Dupont family was no more. The chateau stood abandoned, shrouded in darkness and mystery. The villagers avoided it, fearing the ghosts that were said to haunt the place. But one day, a group of friends decided to explore the abandoned chateau. They had heard the stories of the curse, but they were curious and adventurous, and they wanted to see the place for themselves. As they entered the chateau, they felt a chill in the air. The place was cold and damp, and the walls were covered in mold and cobwebs. They made their way through the dark corridors, their footsteps echoing through the empty halls. Suddenly, they heard a faint whisper, and they froze. It sounded like someone was calling out their names. They continued to explore the chateau, and as they went deeper, the air grew colder and the whispers grew louder. They heard the sound of footsteps, but when they turned around, there was no one there. The friends were getting scared, but they didn't want to show it. They were determined to find out what was causing the strange occurrences. As they entered the grand ballroom, they saw a figure standing in the shadows. It was a woman, dressed in a long white gown. Her face was pale and ghostly, and her eyes were empty and lifeless. She appeared to be looking straight at them, but her gaze was fixed on something beyond them. The friends were frozen with fear, unable to move or speak. Suddenly, the woman began to move towards them, her long white gown trailing behind her. They could see right through her, and she seemed to be floating above the ground. They tried to run, but their legs felt heavy and slow. The woman continued to move towards them, and as she got closer, they could see the fear in her eyes. She seemed to be trying to warn them about something, but before she could speak, she disappeared into thin air. The friends were left standing alone in the grand ballroom, shivering with fear. They never returned to the chateau again, but the memory of the ghostly woman stayed with them. They knew that she was trying to tell them something, but they could never figure out what it was. The chateau remained abandoned, a silent reminder of the curse that had befallen the Dupont family, and the villagers continued to whisper about the ghosts that haunted the place, warning others to stay away from its dark and mysterious halls. As the days went by, the friends couldn't shake off a memory of the ghostly woman. They kept thinking about her and wondering what she was trying to tell them. They decided to do some research and see if they could find out more about the history of the chateau. They went to the local library and started looking through old books and archives. They found out that the Dupont family had indeed suffered a terrible fate. The last surviving member of the family, a young woman named Isabelle, had disappeared without a trace, leaving the chateau abandoned and cursed. But there was something else that caught their attention. In one of the old journals, they found a mention of a young woman named Marie, who had been accused of witchcraft and sentenced to death by burning. The journal entry described how Marie had cursed the Dupont family before she died, vowing to haunt them for eternity. The friends realized that the ghostly woman they had seen in the chateau might have been Marie's ghost, warning them about the curse. They decided to go back to the chateau and see if they could find any clues. As they entered the grand ballroom again, they felt a chill in the air. They could hear whispers and footsteps, but this time they weren't scared. They knew that Marie's ghost was trying to guide them. They followed the sound of the whispers and found a hidden room behind a secret door. The room was small and dusty, but it contained a chest that looked like it hadn't been touched in centuries. They opened the chest and found a diary that belonged to Isabelle, the last surviving member of the Dupont family. They started reading the diary, and what they found was shocking. Isabelle had been secretly practicing witchcraft, hoping to break the curse that had befallen her family. She had made a deal with Marie's ghost, promising to release her from the curse if she helped her. But something had gone wrong, and Isabelle had disappeared, leaving the curse to continue. The friends realized that Isabel's disappearance might have been related to her witchcraft. They knew that they had to break the curse once and for all. They contacted a local priest who agreed to perform an exorcism in the chateau. The exorcism was a long and difficult process, but in the end, they succeeded. The curse was broken, and the ghostly apparitions disappeared. The chateau was finally at peace, and the villagers were no longer afraid of the ghosts that haunted it. The friends felt relieved that they had solved the mystery of the curse, but they also felt a sense of sadness. They knew that the history of the chateau was a dark and tragic one, and they couldn't help but wonder what might have been different if things had turned out differently for the DuPont family. From that day on, the chateau remained abandoned, a silent reminder of the curse that had befallen the DuPont family. But the memory of the ghostly woman and the friends who had solved the mystery of the curse lived on, passing down through generations as a cautionary tale about the dangers of dabbling in dark magic. The friends who had experienced the horror firsthand, it was more than just a legend. They knew that the ghosts they had encountered were real, and the fear they had felt was not something they could easily forget. One of the friends, a writer named Sarah, decided to turn their experience into a book. She spent months researching the history of the chateau and the DuPont family, interviewing locals who had lived in the area for generations. She even went back to the chateau, this time alone, to try and capture the atmosphere of the haunted halls. But as she delved deeper into the history of the chateau, Sarah started to feel like something was following her. She would hear strange noises in her hotel room at night, and she could swear that she saw shadowy figures moving in the corner of her eye. She tried to dismiss it as her imagination, but the feeling of unease persisted. One night, as she was working late in her hotel room, she heard a knock on the door. She hesitated, but eventually got up to answer it. When she opened the door, there was no one there. She shrugged it off and went back to work, but the feeling of being watched grew stronger. Suddenly, the lights flickered, and Sarah heard a loud guttural growl. She froze, her heart pounding in her chest. She tried to move, but her legs wouldn't respond. She was trapped, paralyzed with fear. Then she heard a voice. It was the voice of the ghostly woman they had encountered in the chateau, but this time it was different. The voice was clear and urgent, and it was speaking directly to her. "Sarah," the voice said, "you have uncovered our secret, but there is more to the story than you know. The curse is not what you think it is. You must go back to the chateau and find the truth." Sarah couldn't believe what she was hearing. Was the ghostly woman really speaking to her? And what was the truth she was talking about? She had to find out. The next day, Sarah packed her bags and headed back to the chateau. As she walked through the grand hallways, she could feel the weight of the history surrounding her. She knew that she was walking in the footsteps of the DuPont family, and that their story was far from over. She went to the hidden room where they had found Isabel's diary and started reading it again. But this time, she noticed something she hadn't seen before. There were pages missing, torn out of the diary, and there was something written on the last page that she hadn't noticed before. The writing was in a language she didn't recognize, but it looked like a spell. She started to feel a sense of dread. What if the missing pages contained the rest of the spell? And what if someone had tried to use it to break the curse? Suddenly, she heard footsteps in the hallway. She looked up and saw a figure walking towards her. It was a woman dressed in old-fashioned clothes, with long black hair and a pale face. It was the ghostly woman they had seen before. Sarah tried to run, but her legs wouldn't move. She was trapped, just like before. The woman approached her and whispered in her ear, "Find the missing pages, Sarah. The truth lies within them." And then she disappeared. Sarah knew what she had to do. She had to find the missing pages and figure out what the spell was for. She searched the room, looking for any clues, but she couldn't find anything. Suddenly, she remembered something. When they had first found the diary, there had been a strange smell in the room. Taken her a while to realize what it was, but eventually she had figured it out. It was the smell of burning. Someone had burned the missing pages. Sarah knew that she had to leave the chateau immediately. She packed her bags and headed for the door, but as she reached for the handle, she heard a loud creaking noise. She turned around and saw that the door was gone. In its place was a solid brick wall. She was trapped. Sarah started to panic. She had no idea how to get out of the room. She tried banging on the walls, but they were too thick. She tried yelling for help, but her voice echoed back at her. She sat down on the floor, feeling defeated. She was going to die in the same room where Isabelle Dupont had died centuries ago. As she sat there, she noticed something on the floor. It was a small key blinking in the dim light. She picked it up and looked around for a while. And then she saw it. There was a small door in the corner of the room, barely visible in the darkness. Sarah approached the door, her heart pounding in her chest. She put the key in the lock and turned it. The door creaked open, revealing a narrow staircase leading down into darkness. Sarah hesitated. She had no idea where the staircase led or what she would find at the bottom, but she knew she had no other choice. She had to find a way out. She descended the staircase, the darkness enveloping her. She could hear strange noises coming from the bottom, but she couldn't tell what they were. As she reached the bottom of the stairs, she saw a small room illuminated by candlelight. In the center of the room was a small altar, with a book lying open on top of it. Sarah approached the altar, her heart pounding in her chest. She looked at the book and saw that it was the missing pages from Isabelle's diary, and decided it was a note, written in English. Use the spell to break the curse and free us from our torment. Sarah hesitated. She had no idea what the consequences of using the spell would be, but she knew she couldn't leave the chateau without trying to break the curse. She picked up the book and started reading the spell. As she read the words, she felt a strange energy building within her. It was as if the ghosts of the Dupont family were surrounding her, willing her on. And then suddenly, there was a blinding flash of light. Sarah was thrown backwards, her body convulsing with energy. She felt like she was being torn apart, her mind consumed by darkness. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, it was over. Sarah opened her eyes and saw that she was back in her hotel room. She sat up, feeling disoriented. Had it all been a dream? But as she looked around the room, she saw something that made her blood run cold. On the bedside table was a note, written in the same handwriting as the one in the secret room. The curse has been broken. Thank you. Sarah never went back to the chateau again, but she knew that the ghosts of the Dupont family were finally at peace, thanks to her, and the story of the cursed chateau would live on, a cautionary tale for generations to come. The next day, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching her. She couldn't explain it, but she felt like she was being followed. Everywhere she went, she felt like she was being watched. At first, she thought it was just her imagination, but as the days went on, the feeling grew stronger. She started to see shadows moving out of the corner of her eye. She heard whispers in her ear when she was alone. Sarah knew she had to leave France. She booked the first flight out and headed back home, but the feeling of being watched followed her all the way back to her apartment. One night, she woke up to find a ghostly figure standing at the foot of her bed. It was the ghost of Isabelle Dupont. She was surrounded by a glowing aura, and her eyes were filled with sadness. "Thank you for freeing me," Isabelle said, "but now I am trapped between worlds. I cannot move on." Sarah was terrified. She had never seen a ghost before, and the fact that Isabelle was speaking to her was almost too much to bear. "I don't know what to do," Sarah said, her voice shaking. "There is one way," Isabelle said. "You must find my body and give me a proper burial. Only then can I rest in peace." Sarah had no idea where to start, but she knew she had to try. She spent weeks researching the Dupont family and their history. She scoured archives and old documents, trying to find any clue that could lead her to Isabelle's body. Finally, she found something. It was a letter from Isabelle's father, written just before he died. In the letter, he revealed that Isabelle's body had been buried in the family crypt, but that the entrance had been sealed up after her death. Sarah knew what she had to do. She booked a flight back to France and headed straight for the chateau. She searched the grounds until she found the entrance to the family crypt. It was hidden behind a massive stone wall, but Sarah managed to find a way in. As she descended into the crypt, she could feel the weight of centuries pressing down on her. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and the walls were lined with ancient coffins. Finally, she found Isabel's coffin. It was old and decrepit, but Sarah could see the outline of a body inside. She pried open the lid and saw Isabel's remains. Her bones were brittle and crumbling, but Sarah could feel her presence in the room. She took Isabel's remains and brought them back to the surface. She gave her a proper burial, saying a prayer over her grave. As she walked away from the grave, Sarah felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She knew that Isabel's ghost was finally at peace, and that the curse of the chateau had been broken for good. But as she walked away, she heard a faint whisper in her ear. "Thank you," Isabel's voice said, "but be careful. The curse may still linger." Sarah shuddered at the thought of the curse lingering. She thought she had put an end to the horror, but Isabel's mourning made her wonder. What if she had only uncovered part of the story? What if there was more to the curse than she knew? Sarah spent the next few days researching the history of the DuPont family. She dug deeper, determined to find any clues that could help her understand the curse. What she found was shocking. The DuPont family had a long history of dabbling in the occult. They were rumored to have made deals with dark forces, and their chateau was said to be cursed. It wasn't just Isabel who was haunting the place. There were others. Sarah learned that the DuPont family had a secret society called the Order of the Black Rose. They practiced dark magic and made sacrifices to appease the spirits that haunted the chateau. Isabel was just one of the many victims. Sarah knew she had to put an end to the curse once and for all. She decided to confront the remaining members of the Order of the Black Rose and put an end to their evil practices. She found a list of names in the old documents she had been studying. These were the surviving members of the order. Sarah packed her bags and headed back to France, determined to confront them. She found their meeting place deep in the forest, hidden away from prying eyes. The members of the order were gathered around a bonfire, chanting in an ancient language. Sarah watched from the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. Suddenly, the chanting stopped. The members of the order turned to face her. Sarah stepped out of the shadows, holding a cross in one hand and a Bible in the other. "You have no right to meddle in our affairs," the leader of the order said. "We have been practicing our ways for centuries, and we will not be stopped by a mere mortal." Sarah stood her ground. "Your ways are evil," she said. "You have been sacrificing innocent lives to appease the spirits that haunt the chateau. That ends now." The leader of the order laughed. "You think you can stop us? We have powers beyond your imagination. We are the masters of darkness, and you are nothing but a foolish girl." Sarah lifted the cross and held it out in front of her. The members of the order recoiled at the sight of it, and Sarah knew she had the upper hand. She began to recite passages from the Bible, calling on the power of God to banish the evil spirits from the chateau. The members of the order tried to resist, but Sarah's words were too powerful. They were forced to retreat, leaving Sarah alone in the forest. Sarah returned to the chateau, exhausted but triumphant. She knew that the curse had been broken for good. She walked through the halls of the old building, feeling the weight of history around her. As she entered the room where she had first encountered Isabel's ghost, she felt a sudden chill. She turned to leave, but something caught her eye. On the wall, there was a painting of Isabel DuPont, but it was different from the one she had seen before. In this painting, Isabel's eyes were filled with joy, and she was smiling. Sarah knew that the curse had been broken, and that Isabel's spirit was finally at peace. She smiled and walked out of the room, feeling as if a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. As she left the chateau behind, Sarah knew that she had faced something truly terrifying. But she also knew that she had conquered her fear, and that she would never forget the horror she had faced in France.